Hi kids, my name is Karen and I'm from the Kentucky Equine Adoption Center, and we are going to be talking today about horses' markings and colors. And operating the video is Megan, and you'll hear her voice because we're going to walk through our pastures and we're going to talk about the different horses that we have here and their colors. And I have a handout here that will also show you some of what we're talking about. So this is going to be just a casual walkthrough. It's a beautiful day out here today, unlike yesterday when it was really cold and very cloudy. Today it's warm and sunny. So colors are very cool for horses, and when I was a kid, I always thought my favorite color was a bay horse. And we'll talk about what a bay horse is. But as I've gotten older, I've found that bay is not my favorite color. It's a different color. And we'll get to that color in a little while. So we are in one of our pastures here. We have 3 horses in this small pasture. And this first horse right over here, Megan, is Twiggy. And Twiggy is a bay horse. Bay horses are brown with black manes and tails. And in her case, she has black markings on her legs. So that is considered a bay. If you look at her face, and I will show her what she is if she comes over to the handout. You see that little white spot on her forehead? That's called a star. Doesn't look like much of a star, but any small kind of whitish dot, big or small, in the center of their forehead is called a star. Twiggy was a feral and also wild horse that was born probably in eastern Kentucky. When she came here, she was extremely shy, and you can tell she's still kind of tentative. But she has come a long, long way. That's right. Okay, let's walk over here, and you're going to meet Daisy. Daisy also came from eastern Kentucky with a very, very bad injury on the area below her withers and above her shoulder. She also has come a long way. She is a Palomino. Palominos are very easy to recognize because they have whitish manes and tails and tan bodies. And sometimes that tan is a dark color, sometimes it's kind of a light color, but they're very, very pretty. And when she's fully brushed, her coat is beautiful. So why don't we go to the next pasture? So here we have Butternut. Butternut looks kind of like a piece of butterscotch. This color is called EQN. The reason he is so interested in me is because I have a treat. And Butternut is a real treat hog. He loves food. And so if you look at his body, you don't see any white on it except for on his face. And that marking is a stripe that comes all the way down his face, down to just above his nose, and it merges into what's called a snip. Okay? So he has a stripe and a snip. Moving along. This little girl is Minnie.
No, this is Mouse.
Excuse me. This is Mouse, and you'll see why I made a mistake in a minute. This is Mouse. She's a Hackney pony, and she is a bay. So a bay is a brown horse with a black mane and tail. And if we look at Minnie's legs, there are 2 other types of markings that we see. On her front legs, those are called pasterns. So the white part of the area right above her hoof is called the pastern, and that marking is called a pastern. If you look at her hind leg, you'll see the white goes pretty far up, almost to the middle of her leg, and that's called a stocking. Okay, so you have a pastern and a stocking. Okay, moving around. This is Babe. Babe is, what color would you say she is, Megan?
I'd say she's a liver chestnut for sure.
So a liver chestnut is kind of a cinnamony chestnut. It's basically brown. A liver chestnut, whenever I look at liver chestnuts, I kind of think of a real dark penny color. They're very, very pretty when spring comes and they lose their coats. So Babe is a liver chestnut, which is basically a shade of a chestnut color. We haven't seen any true chestnuts yet, but we're going to in a few minutes. And then moving along down into this pasture a little bit more is Mouse. Now, Minnie and Mouse came together, and sometimes it's hard to tell them apart.
No, this is Minnie.
See? It's hard to tell them apart. This is Minnie. And I always think the other one is Minnie because that one is smaller. But Minnie is this other little hackney pony. She has white on her, and she's considered a bay, a dark bay. So brown, black mane and tail, and you can see the black markings on her lower legs. So we've got Minnie, and we have
And Mouse. Very similar.
Yes. Okay, let's go on. Okay, here we have Belle's Honor. Belle's Honor is a thoroughbred, and she is what you would call a chestnut. Chestnut is a horse that is all brown with a brown mane and tail.
I would say all red.
Okay, all red. Yes, I
You know,
would say,
because
yeah.
brown is all brown.
That's true. Yes, brown is also its own color. So yeah, red. Again, kind of looks like a penny, but not quite as dark as the liver chestnut. So she is a chestnut, and if you look at her face, you will see this little spot. And if you remember from the other horses we just saw, does anybody remember what that spot's called? Okay, it's called a star. Then if you look at the rest of her body, you'll see that she has one, probably what's called a sock.
I call it a sock, yeah.
So a sock is that little white marking on her left hind. The difference between a sock and a pastern is that the sock goes up a little bit farther than the pastern. The pastern doesn't go up quite as far above the hoof. So that's called a sock. Belle's Honor loves attention, as you can see. She's a pretty new arrival to the center, and she's going to be a nice horse, I think. Okay, let's go to Derby Rose. Derby is this whitish horse, but she's actually considered a gray. How can you tell the difference between a gray and a white horse, Megan?
So if you look at her skin underneath, you can see right here, it's more, you can see the black peeking through. So you can tell she's black skin, which would make her a gray. If she had this pink colored skin all throughout her body, she'd be a white horse. And the only reason why she has that pink right there is because she has a blaze or something. You just can't see it.
That's right.
Because she's very light.
That's right. She does have a, it's either a blaze or a snap.
Yeah, something.
When horses come to us, they come with a piece of paper that's called a Coggins Certificate. And the one thing on the Coggins Certificate is the markings of a horse. And the veterinarian that fills out that certificate has to document what color the horse is. And in fact, Derby Rose is a gray, and I can't remember exactly, but it's either a stripe or a snip. I'm not exactly sure. And then over here, all these girls love each other, is Tadashi. And Tadashi is also what color? Same color as Belle's Honor. Does anybody remember? So she too is a chestnut. Remember, the chestnut is this reddish color. She has a beautiful blaze, and these are my favorite horses. Mm-hmm. My favorite are chestnuts with blazes. And yes, we love you too, Belle's Honor. She always wants the attention. So if you look back at Tadashi's hind feet, her right hind is a sock, I would say. Wouldn't you say, Megan? Or would you say that's a...
They'd probably be classified as a pastern just because only a little bit reaches up to the fetlock.
Okay.
But,
Yep.
I mean, you could say it's a sock too.
So a pastern, remember what I said about the difference between a pastern and a sock is the pastern, the white part of the pastern only goes up a little bit above the hoof, whereas a sock goes up to that joint, which is actually called the fetlock. But there's only a little bit of white going up to the fetlock, so I think Megan's right that it probably is a pastern. And on her left hind, does anybody remember what that white marking is called? That goes up almost halfway up the leg, or a third of the way up the leg, and that's called a stocking. So one way I remember stocking is I think of knee-high socks. I don't know if any of you wear knee-high socks, but knee-highs go up to your knee, pretty far up your leg, so that's a stocking. And the last horse we have here is Ellis Offspring. We'll walk over there. She obviously kind of keeps to herself. She just got moved to this paddock. she hasn't been here very long. Does anybody know what her color is? Think about the colors of the other horses in this paddock. Everybody's dirty right now because it's muddy, but it's drying out with this nice wind that we have here. The other thing about this has nothing to do with colors, but do you see the way we're approaching her? Horses don't like to be approached directly from the rear, and that's because they don't see very well directly in back of themselves. They have a blind spot. So whenever you're approaching a horse for the first time, or you don't want to startle a horse, you want to approach from the side, which is the way we did. And the reason for that is because they see best to the side. Their eyes are really big. Horses have the largest eyes of any mammal, so that's a fact you can remember. And they see best from their side. So this is Ella's offspring, and she is a chestnut. Remember, the chestnuts are kind of a red color. She has one white marking, if you look here, on her left hind. So she doesn't have a lot of white. I take that back. If we go around to her head, if you would turn her head,
she says no.
A beautiful star and stripe, wouldn't you say?
I'd say strip.
Strip?
Because the stripe's a bit wider.
Okay.
It's like barely there.
Oh, okay. So this is a strip. Oh, perfect. So you can see that star in the center of her forehead. That star is pretty big, and she has what's called, as Megan said, a strip, which is a very thin line, almost like a little pencil, as opposed to a stripe, which is a little bit wider. So she has a star and a strip. Okay, we're going to go to one more pasture.
Okay, so here we have Cece. As you can see, she is missing an eye. Karen will talk about that in a second, but we're going to talk about her coloring, which, if anyone can remember, what would you call a brown with black mane and tail and black legs? So this would be a bay. Cece would be considered a bay because you can see her legs fade into black out of the brown, which is how we differentiate between bays and browns. And then she also has on her two hind legs, she has some markings. I would probably say that right hind is a sock, and you could either say that left hind is a high sock or maybe even a stocking. It would probably be right either way. It's right in the middle, so kind of hard to tell, but like I said, either one's pretty much correct.
Right.
And then if we look at her face, she has this beautiful blaze. So a blaze is when it's normally, we come up close. Hi, Cece. So we have these two, I have a treat. Give her a treat first. So horses have these facial nose bones going down, nasal, going down their face, and normally a blaze is white at least from those 2 points across, and wider than that, or that white would be called a blaze, and it goes all the way from the top of her head down to her nose. So do you want to talk about her eye a bit?
Yeah, because
we can zoom in on that.
It's so obvious.
It
so,
is.
Cece came to us from a very bad neglect, probably could be classified as a hoarding case. Somebody who owned these horses, she came from a big group, I don't know, 30 or 40 horses. The owner just had too many horses and they weren't being taken care of properly. So we took in Cece and several others, many others. And when Cece got here, she had an eyeball, but it was very sunken in. You could tell she couldn't see out of it. And it just looked completely unhealthy. So she was a little bit on the thin side when she came, and she was very unapproachable. So see how easy it was for me to come up here and stamp the lead rope on her. She's very personal. She has changed so much from when she first came here, and one of the best things that could have happened to her probably is that we had to remove her eye. And we removed her eye because her other eye was very misshapen. Frankly, it was ugly. And it wasn't doing her any good. So she went to the clinic here in Lexington, and she had her eye removed. So when they remove the eye, they actually use a knife, obviously. They kind of scoop the eye out of the bony orb that it sits in with kind of like a melon scoop is basically what they do. And they cut it out, and then they take the eyelids. So in her case, here's her good eye. They took the very top part of the eyelid, the skin that's closest to her eyelashes, and the very bottom, and they sewed that together. And if you look real close, you can still see the scar where those two pieces of skin join. Now, eventually that scar will most likely disappear, and you'll see a very smooth concave depression. The great thing about Cece is that she couldn't see out of the eye to begin with, so not being able to see without her eye is not a big deal for her. And so she's going to adjust very well. And horses do fine with just one eye. Sometimes their depth perception is affected, of course, but they get along just fine. She's young. She's only 5 years old. So she has a long life ahead of her, and she has adjusted beautifully. Okay, we are on our last couple of horses for this session, and we are in a field with 3 horses. Gypsy, whose butt is turned towards us, her little filly Quinn, who is drinking, and right in the background is Crystal. And all 3 of these horses came from the same place that Cece came from. They were all part of that same group, and if you remember, they came from a very large neglect case, and these horses were all part of that. However, when Gypsy, who is the mother, came, she was in full, meaning she was pregnant, with Quinn, and Quinn was born in July of this year. So I'm going to turn this over to Megan, who is going to talk to you about Gypsy and Quinn's color.
Okay, so if we move a little over to the side to see more of Gypsy, she is what we would call a brown and white paint. So you may have heard there are 2 different types of spotted horses, Pinto and Paints, and they look pretty much the same. And the difference between them is that Paint is an actual breed. So Gypsy here is part of the Paint breed. She may look like a Pinto, but we have to call her Paint, because if she was registered, she'd be registered with the American Paint Horse Association, I believe. And her foal, Quinn, is a medicine hat. So you can see she is white throughout her entire body, except for the very tips of her ear have a couple brown markings, and then we can't see, but well, you can see a little bit there. Right on her butt, there's 2 identical brown markings there as well. And those markings on her ears that look like a little helmet, that's what makes her a medicine hat. That would be what falls into the medicine hat color category.
Okay, thank you, Megan. We are going to finish up by recapping the different colors and markings that we talked about, and then we'll be happy to answer questions. We are going to go over real quickly the different colors and markings that we talked about in the field, so you can kind of have it stick in your mind. So Megan is going to zoom in on these diagrams. So here's a color chart. We didn't see all of these colors out in the pasture today, but what we did see is a bay. And remember, a bay is a brown horse with a black mane and tail, and generally some kind of black on its legs. Not all the time, but sometimes. We also saw a chestnut. Chestnuts are all red, and they are a reddish horse with a red mane and tail. We saw a Palomino. Palomino is that lovely honey color with a white mane and tail. And we saw the red dun. So the red dun is a tan color, and the underlying skin color is chestnut, or that reddish color. So that's a red dun. We also saw the gray color. Gray is a whitish looking horse, but has a dark skin underneath. If it was a white horse, the skin underneath would be pink. but the horse we saw out there was a gray. Moving over to the leg markings, we saw all of these except for this one. So let's start over here. The stocking is a white color that goes almost up to the knee of the horse. Think of it kind of like a knee sock. That's called a stocking. The sock is a white color that goes up to this joint here, which is called a fetlock, or a little bit above. So that's a sock. And this marking is called a pastern, where the white goes up to below this joint, which is called the fetlock. That's called a pastern. And the one color or marking we did not see out in the field was a coronet. And that's a thin stripe, for lack of a better word, just above the hoof. And it turns out that that area or body part of the horse is called the coronary band. So this is the coronet marking. And then last, we saw almost all of these facial markings except for one. So let's start with this one. This is a star, a small to fairly large blob of white in the center of the forehead of the horse, called a star. We saw a blaze, which is a nice wide strip of white that goes from the top of the horse's head down towards its nose. Megan pointed out that along the edges of this blaze are two bones of the horse's head, and a blaze generally reaches all of the way between those two bones, and that's what defines it as a blaze. Just a wide marking. We saw a stripe. So a stripe doesn't go all the way to the nose. You can see that it's narrower than a blaze. And then we also saw a strip. A strip is a very thin little line, kind of like a pencil line. And then we saw horses with snips. And a snip is just a little splotch of white on their nose. No other marking in this case above it, but sometimes strips can blend into blazes. It's basically a white marking on its nose. And then the one facial marking that we did not see out in the field is a bald horse. They're very cool looking. You can see that this is a very, very wide patch of white that extends beyond those nasal bones that Megan pointed out to you. Almost looks like somebody took a can of paint and splashed it on the horse's face. Those are called, that's a bald marking. So we did not see that, and we don't get very many horses with that marking on their face. So that helps recap the different facial markings, the different markings that you see on horses' legs, and then some of the different colors of horses. And we're ready to answer questions. Thanks.